Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Akash. I'm the CEO of Airtime. Airtime helps you find all patterns and insights in expert and customer calls. Thank you for tuning in right now. As you can see, I'm the only one live in the show. My dear guest, Sam McAfee, is having some technical difficulties joining. So I'll keep you entertained for the next few minutes. And then let's cross our fingers that he'll be able to join in the meantime. I'll share with you some logistics and upfront information about the session. So let's kick it off with that. Today I'll be talking to Sam about changing bad cultural habits in tech companies. Sam is a tech veteran with 25 years of a CTO and tech position experience. And you know what? I have a surprise for you. Sam, it's a pleasure to have you. Do you like the close-up or should we back out a little bit?
Oh, no, the close-up's cool. I'm good with that.
Okay, I love that. Although you're positioned a little bit higher. It triggers my competitiveness. No, just joking.
Good.
All right. Amazing that you could join. I was just saying a few words about yourself, that we're going to talk about bad cultural habits in tech companies and how toxic cultures can develop. And Sam is a tech veteran with 25 years of experience in CTO and tech positions in companies like Oracle. He's also the founder of Startup Patterns and the author of 2 books exploring how exceptional startups work. I think, Sam, I'll let you talk about your books later on because
Sure.
they're a jam. And we're going to be, by the way, focusing on a couple of chapters in your book today, which relate to culture. So before we kick things off, if just a quick shout out to the audience. I'd love to hear if you can see and hear us properly. Also, where you're tuning in from. We typically have a very nice international setup. People tuning in from the US, South America, all the way to India, where it's quite late by now. Now, I'll be talking to Sam in the next half an hour. We'll have a Q&A session in the last 15 minutes. But if you have any questions, any remarks about what we're discussing, feel free to throw your ideas, feedback, or questions in the comment section, and I'll make sure that latest in the Q&A section, we'll get back to them. Also, if you want to get in touch with me or Sam afterwards, because you'd like to continue this discussion, I'll put our LinkedIn links in the comment section as well. Feel free to connect, reach out, and both of us are more than happy to take the conversation from there. That's pretty much it. We're 4 minutes into the webinar, and it's only me talking so far, so I'm a bad host here. I'm just gonna mute my mic. Sam, it's the second time you're here. I'm honored and thrilled to have you again. I loved our first discussion, and I'm very happy that there was a good excuse to invite you again. So I'll just hand it over to you on this point. Could you say a few words about yourself, just for those who haven't had the pleasure of knowing you and meeting you?
Yeah. All right. I broadly introduced myself. I have been in the tech startup world for 25 years, starting around the beginning of the millennium. I started as an engineer, so I have a strong engineering background. I've been a VP of engineering, a CTO, I've had titles like that. Worked in smaller organizations as a consultant. I've worked in many larger ones as well. So I've been a consultant most of my life, meaning, sort of doing work for hire. First half of my career building software myself with a team for lots of different clients, and then held some roles in the middle of my career as a senior technical leader or a product leader in a couple of different organizations for a while. And then I've also started the company Startup Patterns, which is the same name of my book, my first book, so it can be a little confusing. We started Startup Patterns shortly after the book was published as a consulting agency, which I now run with a small team of colleagues. And we primarily focus, in addition to helping teams with product and engineering best practices, how to build great products, how to talk to customers, how to get stuff out the door efficiently. Our focus has broadened over the years to include the holistic look at the organization, and specifically my personal focus is very much homing in on leadership in particular. So that's both technical leadership, working with CTOs as a coach, VPs of engineering, but also CEOs and the leadership teams in general around just company health. And so it's pretty related to what we're talking about. I think this is kind of where the idea came from our back channel conversation over the months, that this issue of culture is really important to me. And so I'm glad we're going to be talking about it today.
Yeah, thanks so much. And let's jump into it. So your first book is called Startup Patterns. Your second one is The Mindful Product Company. And I took the liberty of zooming in on three dimensions within company culture. These are the dimensions that you identify yourself in the book. And these are psychological safety, conflict management, and the growth mindset. And these are the three topics that we'll be focusing on today. And as a starting point, I'd love to know how you ended up with these three exact dimensions. There are so many scholars out there in the last centuries who examined culture and classified it along various dimensions. And I'm curious what your thought process was.
Sure. Yeah. I wish I had a very sort of streamlined and structured way of answering that question. So I'll just have to give you a bit of my stream of consciousness as an answer, because it's evolved over time. I am a technical person in a technical kind of role, having been in startups and engineering for all those years. But my educational background was actually in the social sciences, and I've been obsessed with social sciences since I was a teenager. I'm a voracious reader of history and political economy and social sciences of various kinds. And so for a long time, I would say the worlds of working in tech and my social science background weren't, it took them a long time to merge, but they really have merged. And so I think that there's different ways of looking at culture, and we can certainly talk about culture in a longer discussion, perhaps another time, as it relates more broadly to our society and how it affects different aspects of people's wants, needs, behaviors, conflicts, that sort of thing. And I'm really interested in that stuff. But I think in this context, we're talking primarily about culture within an organization. So I talk about culture a little bit in the Startup Patterns book, which was published way back in 2016. The new book, A Mindful Product Company, you're getting a preview here, as it's not technically published yet. We're right around the corner. It's almost there. But we got into culture a lot more in depth in the new book. In the original book, Startup Patterns, it's primarily focused on the kinds of coaching and consulting I would do and sometimes still do with founders and early stage teams and companies getting to product market fit. So it's kind of like your recipe book for starting out, and a lot of the cultural dimensions in that book are dealing with setting up a good engineering product-minded culture from the outset. And part of, I think, what I try to emphasize there is that we're in a sort of a tech industry that thinks a lot about technology, a lot about metrics, a lot about sort of, customers and marketing and measuring stuff, and not as much as we probably should about the culture of the companies that we're building. And that's a mistake, because culture really affects how work is done in organizations. And so it actually is a really important lever, actually, if you really are intentional about building a healthy culture. You can leverage that to get better outcomes and faster progress. And the reverse is true as well, that if it's not paid attention to and gets out of control, it can be one of the biggest dampeners on your success and on your progress. And so I think that from the beginning with Startup Patterns, I wanted to emphasize that, culture is really broadly defined as a set of beliefs, observations, behaviors that are typically passed along tacitly between people by observation rather than telling and teaching. People watch each other do things, and we sort of learn organically what's okay in this group. Any social group of more than, say, 2 people starts to develop a culture. So even if you're a startup with 5 folks, like, you have already, whether you're aware of it or not, you've already established certain norms and behaviors and are united around certain beliefs. So that's kind of the baseline, that culture is really important for organizations, and those that are able to, I know a lot of your audience, are people that are building products, and many of them are probably, setting up new companies, which is really exciting. And so this is a good time to be thinking right away of, like, who are the people you have and what are you building as a culture? So very long-winded answer, but to kind of get back to your original question, in developing the Mindful Product Company book, that's sort of pulled from a lot of content that my team and I use in various contexts and working with clients. And we've just found over the years that, psychological safety, it probably works to just give kind of some quick definitions, and then we can talk about
that's exactly. I'd love to. Let's use this as a segue to focus on psychological safety. Before we do that, there's just one more thing which I'd like to mention. Sam, a few weeks ago, I saw that you hosted a discussion around founder mode, which has is at I think a very vivid discussion in the last few months, triggered by the article and blog entry by Paul Graham. And I guess that, like, that founder mode, and how a founder, to what extent they are deep into specific processes of the company, it also has an important impact. And I would just like to leave this in the back of your minds as we talk about psychological safety and some other aspects. If you have, like, any thoughts and take on this founder mode, and from this angle, I'm more than happy if you can share that with us. So this is my side note here, and let's focus on psychological safety. So first of all, what is it? How would you define it, and why is it probably the most important aspect of a company culture?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. So we have 3 items on the agenda, and they all kind of interrelate. So as we define this one, and we'll end up jumping around a lot from topic to topic, because they interrelate and affect each other. But starting with psychological safety, so certainly, like, to my knowledge, this is something that was created by Amy Edmondson, or at least certainly sort of popularized and magnified by her book of The Fearless Organization. It's not something that Startup Patterns came up with. I make no claims on psychological safety as a thing, but since her work has come out, and I don't know Amy, but I follow her, and I think she's taken the conversation much further since the original book. And there are many other people who including us, who have jumped in to try to expand the understanding of how psychological safety sort of operates within a company culture. Specifically, to the way that I would define it is essentially, you have psychological safety in an organization to the degree that anyone in the organization feels comfortable and safe. Comfortable might not be quite the right word, but, like, at least safe to ask questions, question decisions, push back, make mistakes, be vulnerable and curious in any way in the context of working with other colleagues. And so, like, the ultimate example would be, like, does the sort of newest, most junior entry-level person feel comfortable in a town hall asking a very tough question of the CEO? Like, if that is true in your organization, if the CEO doesn't lash out, take it personally, shut them down, if it's like a safe environment to really have a dialogue, then you have a very high amount of psychological safety.
Yeah. So What happens in these environments when you can stand up and I'm an intern in that company and I get to ask the CEO a challenging question? What
Yeah.
happens that makes it a thriving culture and a successful company, or at least on the team structure, right? There's a lot of things that can happen on the market and with your product, but at least from a team structure, you're set up for success.
Right, absolutely. And this does tie a little bit into the founder mode question. And if folks are interested, I encourage you to check out the video of that conversation. And I made my opinion about founder mode very explicit. I could reprise that a little bit here. I think that all of this is based in our context as product development and product company people who are building products, or specifically like technical products, usually involving software or some sort of digital, component. It really starts with the recognition that the successful development of winning products that customers love and that the employees on the team enjoy building are really based on a collaborative process. We know now emphatically from miles of research that's been done over the decades that top-down command and control and dictatorial types of leadership do not produce positive product development outcomes. And so I think that when you think about psychological safety in that context, what we're saying is that if you want to have a great product company that builds great products, you need to have a highly collaborative culture, and collaboration means that there's ideas are coming from lots of different places, that it's a learning environment, that this gets a little bit into growth mindset, but people can explore and make mistakes. And frankly, that the founder does not have all the answers, that it's not a situation where, you can always go to the founder if they're still the CEO, or to the CEO, even if they're not the founder, and assume that they can give you the key to whatever the next thing is that you're working on. That product development is an emergent, organic, collaborative exercise. It's sometimes kind of chaotic. We're working in an environment with a high degree of uncertainty by definition, and that it's not possible to just dictate your way through that. And so in order for people to be able to collaborate, they actually need to be able to ask questions. They need to be able to speak up when they think something is wrong or going off the rails. Peers need to be able to disagree with each other in a respectful way and resolve those conflicts so that they can make a decision and then try something. And it needs to be, more than anything, it needs to be okay for people to make mistakes and be wrong. That I'm gonna stick my neck out and propose something, and that I feel safe that if it turns out to be a bad idea because we try a little bit and we collect data and it was not the right thing to do, that I'm not going to lose my job or be thought of negatively in the company because that was not a successful experiment. So it's really based on having an experimental and collaborative mindset, and that's what produces these outcomes. And that's basically a description of psychological safety.
Yeah. So when you mentioned the town hall, I thought of a new measure for psychological safety, and that measure would be if when you survey the interns in a company and ask them if they had the chance or would they stand up and ask a challenging question from a CEO, what answer they would give to you. And while it's not an exact measure, but it does seem like a proxy.
Or even if they would be comfortable doing it. Like, would they even ask the question, right? Are they?
Yeah, even as a thought. But let's just move away from my thought experiment. Do you have any like scientific method which is more established than mine out of thin air to measure psychological safety in a team, in a company, and to have an understand like an NPS score, giving companies a very clear idea of how satisfied and how loyal their customer base is?
To a degree. I would say that it is a hard thing to quantify, right? It's a hard thing to quantify because what we're describing with psychological safety is how people in the organization feel and so it's effectively a qualitative measurement. And I don't want to get too sort of nerdy into the user research science. There's a lot of people who know this better than I do, but when you have a set of qualitative information you want to know, thoughts, opinions, feelings, usually you can get to some degree of quantification by surveying everyone or on some common scale that helps get a general sense of what the sentiment is across a number of people. So it's like taking effectively qualitative information and quantifying it. So like we have a diagnostic tool that measures a lot of things in terms of becoming a more mindful product company. And it happens to include a number of questions that are geared towards driving out the truth around this psychological safety question. There's a bit of a gotcha, though, in trying to measure this stuff, where if the psychological safety is low, people are afraid to be honest when asked questions or surveyed from a consultant like me, right?
Especially if it's a small team or small company, because then everybody can easily like pinpoint where the answer.
They can infer like, oh, that was obviously Bob's answer or Sally's answer.
I've never thought about that. This is a very important angle because it just puts you in a vicious circle that is very difficult to break.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that's the case, and I think that I don't want to give people the impression that they shouldn't try to measure it. I believe Amy Edmondson also has a lot of material on really how you would approach this. I think that the important thing for this particular item is the recognition that you absolutely can do a diagnostic like ours or others that are out there to survey folks, and if it's set up well, it's possible to get as much honest answers from folks as you can. Like usually when we do our diagnostic work with clients, we have surveys that go out, but we will also include a number of qualitative interviews where we talk to people and we get the context and the story behind it. And, I don't know, maybe I have a trusting face, but I'm a pretty good listener and people tend to tell me what's really going on. And so we can sort of add that to the numbers that we get in the diagnostic and get a really pretty clear picture. And there's also like the questions there are some that are very direct, like, do you feel comfortable pushing back, blah, blah, blah. But there are other questions that we ask that are a little more sneaky, that are designed to kind of ferret out more of that context. And so I think the real question is, it really starts at the top. This is back to that founder mode thing again, right? Like it's up to the senior leader and then the rest of the leadership team to take this stuff seriously and to try to start creating the conditions for more psychological safety if we want this to succeed. It's possible to sort of do it grassroots at the local level, like you on your own team. If you're in a big organization, you on your own team, you have your own sort of local culture with the folks that you work with closely. You could do a lot to move in a more positive direction if you put the work in. But you are kind of surrounded by the rest of the organization. And so it is usually necessary for senior leadership to be taking this on as like a first class issue that they care about in creating a company that's going to be successful.
Yeah, I'd like to double click on the topic of improving psychological safety, because I think it's a very privileged position when you found a company. You're the co-founder and you get to pick the first people that you want to work with, and also have a blank sheet of paper to start defining your culture. Most of us find ourselves joining a company with an existing set of norms.
Indeed.
I guess in your work, you must have come across clients where psychological safety was at a low or at a low point. What are some, and I don't mean to like pick on any clients here. It's just what I'm interested in is what are some of the methods, some of the actions that people can initiate to make a change and improve that psychological safety, so that in turn feels empowered to stand up in the last row and ask that challenging question from the CEO.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are a number of different things that leaders can do, more than we could possibly get into. But I'll try to throw out a couple of concrete things. And I think before doing that, it is a really important point to make that, I want to underscore a couple things. One is that it's having a low, to the extent that we can put psychological safety on sort of this continuum of low versus high, let's just say that that's true. To the extent that you have low psychological safety, it's not something that was set up on purpose. I think it's important for people to recognize, like, even if you're in an organization right now that has a very difficult or even a sort of a toxic culture, maybe you're becoming aware of that, maybe you've known it all along. It's important to realize that a lot of this is unintentional, and it's through the kinds of leadership that are kind of, they learned by wherever they worked before and saw how their boss operated, or the CEO at their previous company. Like, a lot of this, as cultures operate, are passed on just sort of organically as people come from one place to another. So the culture of the organization is, at the beginning, strongly determined by, frankly, like the personalities and quirks of the founders, the founding team, and the things that they believe are important get subconsciously baked into the culture of the organization, and that's reflected through the people they choose to hire. So we're adding people to our organization. They're all coming in with their own personalities and behaviors and quirks and beliefs, glomming onto our general vision for the company, and it sort of grows organically. So it's stuff that kind of emerges. It's not, what I'm saying is, to find yourself in that situation, I think the first step to realize is it's not anybody's fault, but leaders, sort of two things can happen. I think the more common one is a new leader enters the picture. So perhaps company grows to a certain stage. It's very common for founders to be replaced with like a professional CEO. Yep. I've talked to a lot of those over the years. Sometimes an awakening or an epiphany happens, like the CEO is sort of naturally inclined towards this, but hadn't known how to do it. And then they discover, like, oh, I read a book or talked to a colleague and I want to try to do more psychological safety. So either of those could occur. I think it's more common that it's a new leader. And so when a new leader comes in, like, setting the stage on how to kind of reset everyone is part of what happens. And so there's an opportunity to take some actions. And so I think concretely, the very first easiest thing, and it's funny, this is true in so many psychological and neuroscientific domains. The first most powerful thing is actually to identify and label what's happening. So for them to just talk about psychological safety as a concept, sort of publicly in the team or like throughout the organization, is like, hey, we're acknowledging that there's this thing called psychological safety, and we're not totally sure how we're doing on that scale, but like, this is something that we're taking seriously as a leadership team, and we want you to either know that we're looking at it or invite you into a dialogue about how we can improve it. So right at the outset, the first thing they can do is call it out and start conversations, formally or informally, to discuss and evaluate how psychologically safe are we at this company, and are there things we can improve. That's a big step right there, of just the leader having the courage to bring it forth as a topic and invite conversation with folks who work in the company to get their opinion on whether this is, because the other side of it is, a lot of times, because it's unintentional, leaders can often have a more rosy picture of how the company's going from way up in the boardroom, and not realize how unsafe psychologically the company they've created is. They just might not know.
Yeah. And I guess hybrid work and remote work added an additional layer of obscurity on this, where you're not even in the same office all the time. So you can't, just like walking through the office, you can read faces, you can read the temperature in terms of how people relax, how they work. Yeah, exactly. And those are all clues that the top management or anyone for that matter, is missing in a
That's
remote
true.
setup.
Yeah, it's definitely true. It's harder with remote teams, and there are ways around that. But I think we have a whole other webinar we could do on sort of hybrid remote work, RTO kind of stuff. But I think it's worth noting, just for folks to, if they want to explore this more, that and we get into this in the book quite a bit, that there is, there's this, all of this is based on neurological evidence. There's neuroscience, bodies of neuroscience that are studying this kind of stuff about human conflict, behaviors, emotions, and a lot of it is tied into the nervous system, levels of anxiety. A lot of communication happens non-verbally between people in any context, and certainly in an office context. And so anything that is around co-location versus remote work needs to account for the fact that even over Zoom, we're losing a lot of information that our bodies and brains automatically on a subconscious level usually use to infer intent and try to communicate more than just the words that are being spoken. And so if that's our situation, we have to really, frankly, overcompensate for that gap by figuring out other ways to organize that bonding process that can't happen because we're not in person.
Yeah. Do you have, if you're not a leader in a company, let's say I'm that intern, I'm new. Who am I to say what a good company culture is? But I think when we're in a toxic company, all of us feel that. It's sort of very apparent from day one. As an intern, what are my options? And one option is obviously to leave the next day. But let's just say you want to give it a try, and you want to make a change. How can you initiate that?
I'm thinking of my answer, but I want to just say that it's pretty tough as an intern. We might graduate the question up maybe a level or two, but
okay. Do that.
There's not much you can do as an intern. But I think that if we want to say an individual contributor who's does not have management authority, perhaps a junior, someone who's less experienced or newer to the workforce versus someone who's more senior. What can you do? I think the most important thing probably is to first gauge what situation you're in by asking questions. I think that you can, forewarned is forearmed, right? That the more that you at least know what kind of environment you're in can help you modulate your behavior so that your job isn't at risk. And look, I think it's extremely important for us from a compassionate place to take a moment to say, there are a lot of people who are going to be in organizations, maybe hearing this conversation, that and have found that their organization culture is toxic in some particular way, and they know about it, and they don't feel or it's not a material reality for them to leave and seek another job. I don't want to just sort of wave off oh, if you don't like that org, you should get out of there. I mean, that is usually my advice, but it's a little bombastic, and I admit that that's not really an option for everyone. So I think it's important just for us, we want to mostly talk about how to change it and what levers you can pull. But just to take a minute to say, if you are in a situation where you're kind of stuck and that is difficult, it's a difficult environment, there is very little you can do, but I think you can start with, figuring out, who are your allies in the organization, and trying to get yourself in a situation where you report to a manager or work on a team, or at least in the local context, there's more freedom of exchanging views and having discussions. And so you'll only know that if you're new to the job by asking questions about why are we doing this? And can you explain our strategy, and see what kind of answers you get. I mean, certainly sometimes you have people who are relatively junior, let's say, and ask a lot of questions. And, I've heard managers muttering like, "Oh, like why can't they just do the job? They're asking me all these questions about our strategy, right?" Like, so you got to be a little bit like careful about the context and how often you ask those questions.
Yep.
But you want to gather as much information as you can, because that will help you decide what you can do to be successful for the time that you are in that role.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is this, that it's probably not a successful strategy to say, I'm going to change the company culture right now, but rather to look at employees who have like similar feelings, find each other. You can start sharing your stories and also build some sort of alliance. And then, when 5 people raise a topic, or 10, all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're not alone. There's this joint courage of the group, and it's also not just an isolated opinion, but all of a sudden it's an opinion of maybe a smaller group, but it's something that even leaders can't dismiss.
Absolutely. And I think you raise an important point that I talk about, elsewhere in the book and a lot of other places, that recognizing that change in general, we've talked a lot in this conversation and previously about how leaders can set things straight from the top, but it is important to recognize that change doesn't always happen, or even very often happen, through the hierarchy of the reporting structure. That actually, in any group of humans organized into some sort of self-aware collective, whether it's a company, a nonprofit organization, a tribe, even if there is a hierarchical command structure, that a lot of the actual cultural behaviors are passed through relationships, kind of laterally, informally, all over the organization. So that's actually a dynamic that's always happening. And when people talk about, organizational politics or company politics, like, oh, this company, there's too much politics, or like, oh, I hate organizational politics, I actually think it's sort of a neutral thing to recognize that whenever you get groups of people together, there's like issues of governance, like who gets to decide which resources are used, and like that is what politics is, right? And so you're not going to escape it. There's always politics there. And what really what you can do is you can understand that there are lines of influence around the organization that are happening in these informal networks of relationships and conversations over lunch, and people who used to work together at another company and who knows what. And you can actually build in a grassroots way an alliance around particular best practices and champion them through the company. That's how 95% of agile transformations, well, the successful ones, it's usually how they start. Lots of other kinds of changes that happen in organizations where people learn new approaches and popularize them are happening at a grassroots level. But I think there's also we have to recognize that that's happening. And then there is the actual dynamic of what senior leadership is saying officially and how they're operating. And those two things can play together well. So we can do bottom up and top down, and it can work really well. Or they can be kind of at odds with each other, which is true in all too many companies. And then you kind of it's hard to tell what you're going to get from that. If leadership is saying one thing and, all the troops are saying something else, it can be kind of chaotic. So we want to try to do what we can to align both of those parts of the organization so that the outcomes are more successful.
Absolutely. Sam, I'd love to continue this discussion on psychological, and I know we haven't even talked about conflict management and the growth mindset. Those two topics, I'm going to put it on let's call it the parking lot, and we'll come back to that at the next webinar or another discussion with you. Yeah. I have tons of amazing questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we give ample and sufficient time for them. The first one I put on the screen is from Maria. And she's talking about a point that you also mentioned, that successful companies grow, and it's just very different when you're 20 people in a company, maybe working in a large, or a smaller apartment, wherever, and then you grow up to 100, and that culture changes and downgrades. What are your thoughts on her point?
It's a really good observation, and I think it's a great question. And that areas are our sweet spot at Startup Patterns too, Maria. So happy to talk to you about it more in detail. But basically, the way that we typically approach this is that I'm trying to think exactly how to put this, but hiring is one of the most important things that a company does. And yet, in the fast-paced world of the internet, to sound a little like ChatGPT, in the fast-paced world of the internet, where we're all like building companies and trying to grow really fast, and there is this pressure to hire sort of really quickly. You know, we're gonna bring in 50 more engineers. Like I hear that all the time. It's sort of historically been an approach for tech companies in particular, probably other companies as well. You know, when there is hiring going on, which admittedly hasn't been as much lately, but you know, I think the problem that happens is that the leadership team in general and hiring managers in particular can fail to design an appropriate hiring process and have a hiring strategy that's very thoughtful and kind of really thought through. And so in the rush to add people, we may end up just sort of grabbing as many people as we can and shoving them on a team and having them sort of work things out. So as far as tips that I have, I think the answer is to recognize that every additional person that you add to a team or a department or a company will affect the culture. They change the chemistry somewhat every time you have a new person. Kind of everybody has to recalibrate. New relationships are formed. Old relationships shift. And so it's really important to be pretty mindful about the hiring process and have a hiring strategy. Basically, who are we hiring and how fast and what order, and making sure, one, that we've developed an interview process that is thorough and fair, and remembering that hiring is a two-way conversation. Like the candidate is feeling us out too. We're not just evaluating the candidate. There's sort of this mutual, like, are you going to be a good fit here question that really needs to be very careful and methodical. And then also, as people are coming on board, we've also seen where people will not have a very rigorous onboarding process. So an onboarding is not just giving them their laptop and the password to their email. It's like the whole process of getting someone up to speed on what's the culture here. You know, what are our standards? How do we operate? There's processes and best practices, but also, you know, what's it like here? What are the things that are important? What should I not say in a meeting because we have some taboo subjects or whatever it is? So there's a sort of a social or, relational onboarding that needs to happen. And that just takes a certain amount of biological time, you know, because people can only learn so fast. So we need to be smart about our hiring strategy, really careful about how we do the hiring itself, and have a really clear onboarding process that sets expectations right in the beginning about how we want you to succeed here as being part of our team, and has, you know, clear kind of metrics and thresholds, maybe 90 days in, to see if it actually is a good fit after a certain amount of time. So I don't know. I threw a lot of tips out there. That's sort of the best I have at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot. Maybe to add an additional thought on and building on what you shared, Sam, there's a lot of things that change when you're a small team. I had this experience, you know, it's just 10 of you in that company. Everybody's working with the co-founder. And all of a sudden you have a seed, the Series A round. And in a couple of years, you find yourself just remote from those top decision makers, which is it's just a tough place to be, because you feel that you had so much influence, and I don't have a happy ending to this, or a Cinderella story. This is just something that I personally like. I decided to just take it and find my passion and find what I love in that context, because it was a beautiful phase in the early phases, but I can't take the company back. The company has moved on, and it's just the sheer size that makes it improbable and inefficient. That in this case, I'm talking about this relation to the co-founder and working
Right.
with the top decision maker.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky situation, and I think that every company struggles with this as they grow. I think there are ways to approach it where, I mean, first of all, like the founder, like you don't want the founder necessarily involved in everything anyway as you grow. Like one of the things that constrains success in an organization is the degree to which the original intent of the vision and strategy of the company can be successfully passed on to the rest of the organization as it's growing, so that people kind of have internalized, the idea behind the company, but also that over time they're adding their own flavors to the soup. That necessarily founders need to be able to get out of the way of their company's own growth in order for it to be successful, and that can be a really difficult thing for some founders to do, because it's, there's a lot of ego mixed up in the original idea. And so only the truly enlightened or mindful leaders are able to transfer some of that vision and delegate authority properly to the rest of the organization, so that it can take on a life of its own and grow into this great organization that you wanted when you first founded a company, right? But that's how a lot of leaders are they're in their own way, blocking their own success and growth because they just can't get their hands out of the pie.
Yeah, I have a question from William, which reflects on the question from Maria, looking from the other side as a job seeker. How do you find those companies that have a good company culture from the outside?
Yeah, absolutely. I, as an aside, I do a lot of coaching as part of the work that I do, and some slice of that, non-negligible slice of that coaching, is with folks who are doing job transitions, usually with leaders, but lots of different folks. And so I have a certain approach that I've written about. It's not a secret. I think that the first thing to say is today, job seeking is all about networking. It really centers around building your network, using your network, and doing a lot of conversations and coffee and back channeling to try to find organizations that you're going to be a really good fit in, right? So there's a sort of first step of figuring out yourself and what you're looking for, and we've got a whole process for that. But I think the next step is really going around and talking to people who work in the company. So like, just if you're, just kind of throwing an application at a Google or a Microsoft or a Meta or something like that, your resume goes into the machine and they sort of like chew it up, and you may never hear from them again. And like, we all heard this story or had this happen many, many times. And so the best way to approach the job searching in general is really leveraging your network and figuring out who you know where, and who can introduce you to people that can tell you about what it's like to be in a company, right? So let's say there's an organization that you are excited to work for, like, oh, it would be great to work there. Rather than just going directly to the jobs page and clicking apply, what I would do is I would try to hustle my way to figure out who is in that organization that I can either directly approach, or maybe I know someone who can introduce me to someone there. And you can learn a lot just through casual information gathering conversations. You could call them information interviews. You can find out a lot about, what, if you ask the right questions about what it's like, and figure out if that culture is really going to be a fit for you. And so for those who are a little nervous about doing that, let me just say that, like, I think I've found I'm going to throw out a number, 90% of the people that are out there are welcome inquiries from people about their work. So don't worry about like feeling like a pest or feeling like a bother. It's like it's on them to politely decline if they don't have time to talk to you. But like it's perfectly fine to reach out to someone and say, hey, I see you're, they had a product at such and such, and it looks like an exciting industry, and I'm exploring my next role. Would you be willing to talk to me a little bit about the work that you're doing at this exciting organization and just, answer some of my questions? And do like 50 of those, and you'll have a broad range of that information.
And people who have passionate opinion, be it positive or negative, I think they're likely to get in touch and share that with you.
Yeah. And because your whole business is around interviewing people and asking them questions. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Let's have a look at the question from Kylie. We touched on this in our discussion slightly. And the question is about, you find yourself in a situation where psychological safety is sort of evaporated, lack for a better word to describe that from that team. What are your advice for individual contributors?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I just want to validate for Kylie and others who are feeling this way or in this situation that it is really tough. It's really difficult, and I don't want to be flippant about just find another job. So given that we were just talking about job seeking, if it is possible that you are in an organization where it is not, you're not going to be able to change it, and this is particularly true if you have a boss or a manager that is toxic or tyrannical. Like I've coached a lot of people who have been in that situation. You are not going to be able to change that person. And so I think, first of all, if it is at all possible for you to start thinking about how you might go to another organization, that's definitely an avenue to explore. And that might not be the case for everyone. So I acknowledge that. But if you can, if that's an option, even if you have been there a long time and haven't thought about it for a while, just acknowledging that there's only so much you can do unilaterally. And with particularly toxic people and toxic organizations, sometimes your best option is to run away. So I just and again, I don't want to minimize that it's easy to find another job, but I want to be really explicit that might be your best option. If that's not possible, or you're not ready to leave, or this situation isn't quite as bad, then I think that what advice I would have would be to proceed with caution. And basically, I think it's important to try to connect. So let's say you're in a sort of a local working group of people, a team, a department, whatever. It's probably a good idea to set up time with the other individuals that you work with one-on-one, and your manager or other senior leaders that are near you or can influence the situation if possible. And I wouldn't put it as like trying to change the culture is your goal, or sort of battling for the change. Like, I feel that way a lot. I get passionate about it, but I would try to reframe it a little bit more from a position of curious inquiry, right? Like going around and seeing, is this a problem? Like you sense that there's a problem. You're not wrong. Like if you're asking this question, we believe you, it's probably true, but you want to find out, are you the only one that sees it? Are there other people in the organization that are having the same challenges? And really start to kind of get a sense from other people how serious it is to them. And I think at a certain point, if there is a leader that is willing to talk with you about this, and you think can make a change, you can work with that leader to try to slowly move the culture. If, as I was saying earlier, that leader is actually the problem, there simply might not be anything that you can directly do. So
yeah.
It
I
depends.
I also have some friends who shared similar stories with me in recent months, and they were in the lucky position that they worked in larger organization, and for them, like stepping sideways into another team, into
Absolutely.
another geography, it solved the problem because it wasn't that it was toxic culture across 60,000 people. It was
Right.
just a particular leader that they had a
Yeah.
problem with.
Put in for a transfer. And you can do it in ways
Yeah.
that do not say, I can't stand this leader. I need to work with someone else. You can come up with other reasons why you really want to be in this department and not that department. So, yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
there are a lot of strategies. The main point I'm making that I want them to take away is that, don't die on that hill, right? Like it may be an impossible situation, and please reserve your own energy, your own body budget, your life force for more positive things, and don't sort of throw yourself into that maw and just get chewed up. Like it's so easy to get burnt out trying to change an organization or a person who just won't.
Yeah. I have Christian here in the audience, and he is would like to pick your mind on a different topic, which is related to dealing with old-fashioned, very traditional stakeholders, like working as a corporate with the public sector. What are your thoughts, and
Absolutely.
what is your take on this question?
Yeah, it's pretty common. You're not alone. There's a lot of other people that are facing this similar situation. I think the first thing to do is, and I'm not saying that Christian would do this, but we wouldn't obviously tell them that we think they're traditional, right? So there's definitely a recognition that you have stakeholders that are not up to date on the benefits of digital platforms and maybe uh, in roles by default or de facto that they happen to be heading up an initiative or on a council or a board that makes decisions around that stuff, and it's not really their forte. Um, what I would say is that in all of those cases, when you have a leader that you feel is kind of not up to speed on modern ways of doing things, you really have to exert as much empathy as possible and try to go to them, engage with them, whatever that looks like, from a place of genuine openness to their point of view and curiosity, because what you want to try to do is to take the thing that you are hoping that the conclusion you're hoping they will come to, probably needs to be translated into terms that they understand and care about. But you can't do that until you're really clear on what are the terms that they understand and care about, right? So we need, like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the habits, I think it's 5, is seek to understand before being understood. And I repeat this a million times to all of my leadership coaching clients and whatnot, that you want to go to them with questions to understand where they stand and what's important to them, so that you can communicate it, what you want them to learn or consider, in language, after translating it into language that they can relate to. But that requires that sort of open dialogue, and also asking people questions about their opinion or where they stand makes them more open to listen to you later. So you always want to start with that empathy, open, curious inquiry. Hey, we really want to do a good job. We're trying to work here together with you. I want to know what's important to you. Like, tell us how you see the priorities of this initiative. And then you can gradually move the conversation towards bridging that gap in language or intent, but only after you really understand their point of view.
Okay. I have a last question from Maria. I'll let you read through that.
Sure. Okay. We know you need psychological safety, but how do you get there? How to get rid of all the bad apples first? How to make sure you're in fact getting rid of the right people and not someone you should in fact keep. Okay, cool. We got like
And just before you answer that, there's, I think, in if company culture is turning toxic, there's also high risk of high performing, really likable and friendly people leaving in the first place, just
yes.
exaggerating the impact that Maria is
Hmm.
describing.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, and I think it's really an important thing for all leaders to consider that it's not just that the place is static, but that if so yeah, low psychological safety prevents us from collaborating and building great products. But you're right, there's this weird effect that the really good collaborative, high performing people hate being in that environment. So they will all leave, and then you'll be left with, I don't want to knock other people, but the folks who are, I don't know, a little more complacent with mediocrity for whatever reason. And so yeah, it's hard to recover from it. I would say it's a little bit of a radioactive topic to kind of talk about, firing certain people. Not that I'm against it. I mean, there are times you have to let people go, but I think it should really be seen as a last resort. So I think that there are a lot of times where, there are leaders who are let bad apples stick around for too long. That does happen. But I think that it's not as much about the individuals on the team. I think that you do probably want to make sure that everyone there should be there, that they want to be there. But really, like, again, I would bring this back to leadership, because that whole situation is set up in such a way that the vision is maybe not clear. The strategy is maybe not clear. The right tone and intention, goals, objectives, and key results. Things have not been set up in a way that the teams who are actually operating, or even, their management layer above them, are not all on the same page. And so I think it's important to realize that psychological safety isn't just a condition that's generated, by certain bad attitudes. It can be that there's a lot of confusion because the leadership hasn't been clear about what's going on or what they want people to do. People are necessarily trying to do a good job and jumping to their own conclusions in order to do so. And I jump to this conclusion and you jump to that one, and we're rowing in different directions, and then there's conflict, right? And so it can be a tricky situation if the overall leadership structure isn't setting people up to succeed. So I would consider changing the people as something that it may be necessary, but is certainly the last resort. And instead looking at what's under the hood here. What are the sources of disagreement? How are, maybe there are people there who are prickly and need coaching, right? Like, I do coaching. I work with people on better empathy and communication skills, for example. There are many coaches out there who do work. So maybe there are folks that can be trained to be more open to psychological safety, for example. So I'm just putting that out, not to push back too hard on the question, because I'm looking, it is a serious question and you do have to do that sometimes. But I would want us to really emphasize, like, starting with, there's a great framework. We didn't get into conflicts, but I'll just talk about it really quickly. There's a great framework going back to the 1970s called the GRPI, which is a way of decrypting where conflict is coming from. And it's an acronym simply for goals, which is the G, roles and responsibilities, which is the R, P is processes and procedures and protocols, and I is interpersonal interactions. And the point of the framework is that the research showed that 80% of the time when we look at why there's a conflict occurring, it is that the top of the chain, the goals, are not clear to the people involved. They're not on the same page. And it sort of goes down from there. So each level is less and less likely to be the source of conflict. But that's the way that you diagnose, like, why are these people not on the same page? Well, first we'd start with, are they looking at the same goal? Is that clear? Then you look at, like, maybe the roles and responsibilities aren't defined well enough. And then you can look at, like, perhaps it's the process. And then only at the end is it usually an actual, like, individual personality conflict between two people.
Thanks a lot, Sam. We went way over time, but
It's fun though.
to be honest, I also had from the audience a popular vote to get you back for a follow-up session to cover conflict management and growth mindset. So let's go back to our back channel and discuss when and how to do that. I really appreciate all the wisdom that you shared and all the practical experience and suggestions, and I'm eternally obliged also to the audience for the amazing questions, for the activity, also for daring to share your problems and challenges. These are sensitive and difficult topics, so I really appreciate that. With that, I'm going to conclude in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be focusing on critical user journeys. So come around if you're interested in that. I'll be having a UX director from Google joining me. Also very, very interesting, very different topic than toxic cultures. So with that, I wish everyone a very nice evening, or whoever is in California or that part of the world, a beautiful and gorgeous, a gorgeous day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for having me. It's great.